In the last 2 years, I've read 15 books that turned me into an avid fantasy reader, and today I'm gonna rank them. I've chosen banger books only, so no matter how low I rate them, trust me, these ain't books you're gonna wanna miss. Our categories are Had a Great Time, Certified Banger, All-Time Favorite, and of course, Altered My Brain Chemistry. Let's start with one that brought me back into the world of fantasy. One that I don't see people talking about enough. On Wings of Ash and Dust by Brittany Wang is the kind of book you get when you take the characters from the franchise Tinkerbell, throw them into their very own Tri-Wizard tournament on a Pirates of the Caribbean style backdrop. A wanted pixie pirate named Quinn is forced to enter a deadly fairy competition when her twin brother is killed and her identity exposed. To survive the trials and avoid a fate in the pixie dust mines, she must face dangerous enemies, uncover dark secrets, and decide who to trust before an ancient prophecy destroys their world. I picked this one up because when I initially saw it, it was being released in episodic parts, and I found that really interesting. Brittany Wang was experimenting with the idea of releasing an entire book, but in 6 parts, and it can be read almost as if it was a TV series, which makes the pacing extremely fun on this one, and it's the first book in the fantasy genre that I decided to pick up, mainly because I'd really enjoyed the marketing of the book, and also I'd joined a course that she was doing about how to create series as well, and having met Brittany Wang, I thought, oh, this is a really good book to give a go. I wanted to try out fantasy, but for so long I was nervous because these books are big, and they're wild, and they're wonderful, and there's a lot of learning to do in them, so I really struggled to be able to convince myself for many years to try it. And this is the book that kind of broke the mold for me, and that is why this book is on this list. It's because it broke it down into episodic chunks. Nothing ever felt overwhelming. If you're into romantasy, this is a good one. If you're not into spice and you want a bit of romance, this one has a bit of romance in it as well, but that isn't kind of the main pull of the actual story. It is the crazy kind of different trials that they have to undertake, and also this intriguing background of a prophecy that is unfolding. I also know that the second book is going to be coming out this year, and there are scheduled to be 3 more books after this one, because she decided to write the second book in 3 parts, and it ended up being 3 full massive books. So that's going to be a really interesting one to check out this year, and definitely one that I want to give a go. For this one, I am going to be ranking it as Had a Good Time, because it was actually just a fantastic time. The characters were really good, the dynamics of it were really good, the pacing of it made it so easy to digest. I got through this one so quickly, and this book made me confident to try out more fantasies. So it was the thing that kickstarted my journey onto reading all of these books that you see by my side. So I have to say, I'm very grateful for this one, because it's what inspired me to go to the store and pick up Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. This one promised to throw me into a Viking-inspired world full of awesome-looking gods and had a bloomin' big dragon on the front. I was like, count me in. From the moment I saw this and the tiny little man looking up at the giant dragon, I was like, this has got to be the one for me. I'm a big Norse-inspired fan. I like the Viking mythology, and I saw that John Gwynne definitely knows what he's on about, because he was also a Viking reenactor as well. So I decided to give this one a go, and I was not disappointed. The characters in this book made me so happy. I really enjoyed every single character and every journey that all of them were on. People will tell you that there is one point of view in this book that pulls it down. Those people, in my opinion, are wrong. Every single character that is a point of view in this book has something to say towards the overall theme of family versus the chosen family that you go for. There's lots of awesome things that happen within the world. There are monsters. If you like monsters, here there be monsters, and there's some like really cringe-worthy monsters that make you want to go, ah! And then there's other monsters that make you want to run away and scream, and you'll be scared to ever sleep in a forest at night. This book, I went on to read the entire trilogy. It is the first and only fantasy trilogy I've actually completed right now, and I'm so glad that I have. This book in particular has to go into the certified banger category. category. The next one, Hunger of the Gods, is extremely good. I've not put it on this list, mainly because these are the books that made me a fantasy addict. And Shadow of the Gods is the one that kickstarted that journey for me, so I had to focus on Shadow of the Gods overall. But this certified banger isn't where the journey started. Before we get on to the next thing that I decided to pick up, we need to double back, because no list about how I started to read fantasy would be complete without Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, or the Sorcerer's Stone if you're in the US. Not only did this book get me reading, it also convinced me that I wanted to be an author. As a young boy of the age of 8, when I used to struggle with getting the pictures in my head, I went out to the cinema and watched the film and decided that I would pick it up. And from that moment forth, I never had a problem getting pictures in my head, and I was able to read books. I read through all of the books after that before the next films came out. So yes, I really do appreciate this book for getting me started on the journey. I gotta say, what's really interesting and slightly ironic is that it has a trope in it that I actually really don't like. I don't like the Magic Academy trope. I can never really get on with it, but for some reason these books, whether it be to do with nostalgia, because when I read it originally I was in the right place for that type of a trope, or whether it to be with the fact that it's executed really well, I'll let you decide that when you go and read it. But I'm going to be putting this one in the all-time favorite category because I have read it many a times. This might be my most read book ever. I don't think I've ever read a book more times than I've read this particular book, so it had to go on this list. Even though it wasn't the one that got my adult life reading fantasy going, it is kind of the book that started me reading in the first place, so it had to go on here. After whetting my appetite with Shadow of the Gods, I decided that I want to try something a little bit more indie, so I went out and I picked up Unsold by Will White. This one follows Lyndon, who is born without the ability to use magic in a world built on sacred arts. When he's shown a vision that only he can see, he sets out on a journey to forge his own path, gain power by any means necessary, and save his people from destruction. This book is the first in a 12-part series. It's quite short for a fantasy and extremely appealing to me back then when I didn't want to tackle any of the big tomes. I have to say, it's a very interesting experience reading this one. A lot of people say that it's quite like anime, and it is actually getting its own animation series recently. I haven't actually gone on to read any more, however, it has been on my to return to list. And the reason why it's actually on this list is because it is one of the early books that I picked up that also showed me the different degrees of things you can do with fantasy. There are certain points of this that do feel a little bit sci-fi elementy, which is very interesting in the way that Will White puts the world together. It's a very unique style of world. I think from the first few pages, I instantly found myself empathizing with the main character because he is an underdog, and it's very interesting to see this underdog exist within this world. Having no powers is such a big deal, and obviously when you've got an underdog character, you only want them to succeed, so it's always a really fun trope to be getting into. And this particular book was really fun, but I'm gonna put it on the had a great time. It did a good job of entertaining me, but it never went any further than that. But I did appreciate reading this book. It certainly opened my eyes to what indie authors can do with the books. And after I finished this book, I felt ready to take on one of the classics that has been eluding me for many years, which is why I went out and got a copy of The Hobbit. Now, I don't need to tell you what this one is about. I just know that as a child, I found this one so tricky to get into. As I've already established, I wasn't exactly the best reader in the world, and picking up Harry Potter was a challenge enough for me. I really enjoyed it, and I rose to the challenge and became a better reader because of it. But The Hobbit just wasn't ready to be a part of my life when I was a child, which is a true shame because I do believe if I had pushed on, then I would have found this beautiful story of pure joy. It is actually such a great little adventure, and anyone that is looking to get into the fantasy genre, it is definitely one to pick up because you can literally read this entire thing in a couple of days. You don't need to go on to read Lord of the Rings. It isn't written in such a way where you demand a sequel. You can pick up the sequel whenever you want, which makes it quite a good read. I have to say what I really liked about this one, it was episodic in nature, but I didn't mind that. I really enjoyed the found family trope in this one, and all the characters that Bilbo met along the way, the different explorations of Middle-earth that we got to go through within each chapter. In fact, not only did the book feel like a standalone, each chapter felt like a standalone. So it almost felt like I was watching an episode of a TV series every single night that I read it. So I actually really enjoyed The Hobbit, and I'm going to put this in the had a great time category, because it was bundles of fun and joy, and it's not ridiculously dark. It doesn't take you down too many dark paths, though there is a little bit of darkness hidden in Middle-earth, which obviously goes on to grow when you get to Lord of the Rings. But for this one, I gotta say, I'm really glad that I did pick it up, and it is definitely one that did build my understanding in the genre of fantasy. Of course, one of the things that I really did enjoy within this book was the dwarves and the elves and the Tolkien style creatures that existed within it. I didn't feel ready to pick up Lord of the Rings just yet, and I still actually haven't read Lord of the Rings, which I know is sacrilege, but I do intend one day to do the reading vlog if you demand it. Demand it in the comments. Demand it and you will have it. The more demands I get, the closer I will get to reading Lord of the Rings. But right now, as it stands, I have not read Lord of the Rings, and instead I decided to turn to something else which had dwarves and elves in it, and I wanted something that was a bit more modern, that I could still be able to delve into, that felt a little bit more accessible to me, which is why I went out and picked up Of Blood and Fire by Ryan Cahill, which in my opinion is probably one of the most perfect books to read if you really want to get into fantasy and you don't know the genre at all. A lot of people do have complaints about this specific book, saying that it is slightly derivative and there's a lot of copycatting going on, and yeah, there's a lot of influences that you can see are active within this book. However, if you just want to get into the genre, this is actually a really good book to do that. Set in the land of Etheria, a war-torn realm divided by mistrust, a grieving village boy named Kalen is thrust into an ancient conflict when mysterious strangers arrive bearing a deadly secret. With no prophecy to protect him, no destiny to guide him, he must survive in a brutal world where he bleeds like any man. It is a super cool world. It is cozy at first. There's a lot of cozy vibes in here. I really enjoyed it. I've read this book twice, actually, and still not gone on to read the rest of the series yet. Not because I don't want to, but because I haven't just been in the right place to read the books. The books that follow are quite big books, so I have to be in the right headspace ready to tackle them, and I just haven't got around to doing it yet, although I am extremely excited, and to be honest, the longer I meander on this, the less time I'm going to have to wait for the fifth and final book, which he hasn't written yet. So, you know, it doesn't matter too much that I'm waiting around. However, what I will say is this is a brilliant book to get you started, mainly because it's just got all of the stuff that you expect out of fantasy in there. It's got dwarves, it's got elves, it's got dragons, it's got, like, cozy villagers, it's got scary creatures, it's got all sorts of things like that. It's got an interesting plot. The most interesting plot for me is some of the smaller stuff that goes on within this book. It's setting quite a lot of things in motion, and by the end of the book, I'm pretty certain that you're going to want to check out book 2, because in my opinion, the cliffhanger in this book is like a mini cliffhanger, but the cliffhanger is extremely interesting nonetheless. There are one or two moments within this book where I still can't get my head around why they actually happened in the way that they did, but this was Ryan Cahill's first book that he wrote, I believe, during lockdown, so it's extremely impressive, and it has actually come out as such an enjoyable time. But I have to put this one in the certified banger category, because I know that all the things that are being set up, I trust that they are going to develop into something so much bigger than what this book can promise. This book is just over 500 pages, which is quite short for a fantasy, and manages to achieve quite a lot in those 500 pages, but most of all, it sets me up really, really wanting to check out what comes next. I've read this book twice. The first time I read it was when I was just starting to get into fantasy, and the second was when I felt a little bit more confident within the genre. The first time I read the short story The Fall after I'd read the book, and the second time I read the short story The Fall before I read the book. And apparently you can read this in either way that you want. The reason why I think that reading the short story first was good for me is because it grounded me within the world and showed me a few things that I was going to expect in later books before I started to read it, and I actually found that reading this book following having read The Fall was much more rewarding because I was picking up things within this book that I think I would have missed if I hadn't read The Fall first. So I definitely recommend doing it in that order if you're going to go check it out. The Fall was originally apparently going to be the prologue and turned into something a lot longer and ended up being a short story a novella that he released alongside this. But it's a really great place to get started if you want to get into fantasy. And when I originally read this, I really enjoyed the sort of classic nature of it and couldn't wait to read other books that people had said that had influenced it. But before I decided to do that, I'd kind of discovered Brandon Sanderson and was looking into the Cosmere. I was doing a bit of research trying to figure out what book is going to be the best one for me to do next. Everyone recommended that I try out Mistborn, so naturally I decided to pick up Way of Kings. This one is set 4,000 years after the Knights of Radiance have fallen, but their legendary weapons known as shard blades still fuel wars across the storm-lashed land of Roshar. As a soldier slave, a war-haunted commander, and a scheming scholar uncover ancient secrets and visions of the past, each is drawn to reviving the Radiants to face a greater threat behind the war. I don't know, I guess I just kind of wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to get a book that was going to feel like it would go on and on and on, forever and ever and ever, so I could feel like I was reading for an infinite amount of time and get really into the nitty-gritty details. And this book sort of delivered on that, but also left me wanting more somehow. Every single book in this series is over 1,000 pages long, and yet for some reason, I just couldn't stop reading it. I really love the characters within this. I always say how much I love the characters. I love the world as well. I love the message and the tone of these books. I've heard people go on about how Brandon Sanderson's prose is quite simple and to the point, and I kind of like that about it. I think that was one of the reasons why it was so easy to read. But ultimately, I don't think I've felt the sheer level of emotion I have felt from these books. This book made me jump for joy, and anybody who has read it probably knows exactly what point that happened. It will make you jump for joy too. I then went on to read a few more books, and book 3 actually ended up having the moment that for me is something that I reach to all of the time when I am having a hard time. I suffer with anxiety, and when I am having a hard time, I will reach to that book to remind myself of some really important messages that are within it. So I have to say, when I first read these and people were like, well, Brandon Sanderson writes the best mental health related content in the fantasy realm, at first I didn't get what was going on. I remember thinking at the time, I don't know if this is actually a good depiction of mental health. A lot of the time when someone hasn't really been through mental health themselves, they don't really know how to describe it, and a lot of people do tend to say to you, I understand mental health, when they only understand the concept of mental health and not the actual experience. But by the time I got to book 3, I can tell you that the things in there are so powerful and helpful to people that do struggle with their mental health that I really, really enjoyed these ones. And for that reason, I'm going to put this one as altered my brain chemistry, because it really did in a very positive way. After reading that book, I had fully caught the Sanderson bug, so of course I double backed and picked up Mistborn. If you don't already know what this one is about, imagine a world where the Dark Lord has won, and ashes fall from the sky, and people are enslaved, and everything is extremely dark. And then you have this one badass dude who is out there basically trying to liberate the slaves, to defeat the evil Dark Lord, who is teaching everyone that he is a god, which brings lots of interesting questions about religion and what religion is and what stories we tell ourselves to get through certain places. Then, of course, we have the magic system, which is extremely cool. Different people can do different things with different pieces of metal, except Mistborns, who can do everything with different pieces of metal. They just need to know how to do said everything. This book in particular is an interesting one because it's got lots of really cool characters. It's got a really cool heist plot that is so interesting to read, and by the end of it, you do end up thinking very deeply about the themes that are at the heart of it. And this is where this one actually really stuck out to me. It was the themes that we were discussing within the book, and the way that it ends in such an interesting way that solves the problem in such a perfect manner similar, but leads on to ask more questions which will make you want to pick up the second one, The Well of Ascension. Brandon Sanderson is extremely good at weaving together a plot, and this one is no different. I can tell why this one is the one that a lot of people are drawn to when they start out reading him, because it is a lot simpler than Way of Kings, but it is also full of interesting and exciting magic things that happen within, and the world of Mistborn is actually very, very fascinating. I did go on to read the rest of the trilogy, and unlike a lot of people, I actually didn't think that it got better than this book. I thought this book was the best book within the trilogy. It is a very solid trilogy. I've just realised this is actually the second trilogy that I've read. I was lying earlier when I said that Shadow of the Gods, the Bloodsworn trilogy, isn't the only one. Apparently I've read this one too. I've just realised that is a trilogy that I've actually read. I haven't read many. So yeah, the second and only second that I've read, I think, was the Mistborn trilogy. And in my opinion, the trilogy wasn't as good as this single book on its own. However, I do believe if you did enjoy this book, it's totally worth reading the next two, because they weren't terrible books. It's just, for me, this book set such a high bar, and it never kind of overcame it for me. Although I would say it's a very satisfying trilogy to read, so definitely one to pick up, especially if you are thinking about getting into this genre and you want to try some trilogies out. As far as trilogies go, you could definitely do worse, and that is why I'm putting this book in the certified banger category, because it is absolutely banging. When I finished this book, I caught a whiff of something on the zeitgeist, and it's not a book that I actually have on me right now, because I have lent it to my sister-in-law, because she is a massive Hunger Games fan, and this one is Sunrise on the Reaping. Now, when I went in to read this book, I had no idea what I was getting myself in for, because I did it for a reading vlog that I was going to do, where I read all of the Hunger Games books in chronological order. This book was really a huge emotional roller coaster for me. It was a great book because I couldn't put it down. It really drew me in, but it absolutely beat me up as well. If you're a fan of the Hunger Games franchise, it probably won't affect you as deeply as it affected me. Basically, this book shows you a character called Hamish's Hunger Games and what he went through during that time, and it is actually slightly different to the way that history has written it in future books. So it would actually be quite intriguing to anyone who has actually read the Hunger Games, and anyone who hasn't read the Hunger Games. This is a brutal book. It really hurts right to the very last page. It grips you, it holds onto you, and it will not let you go. And even after the book was finished, I still think about that book almost a year after having read it, and I believe that is why it has ended up on this list. The world is so oppressing, which makes you root for the characters so hard, but the world is so good at beating them down. And the way that the Hunger Games is put together, it is apparently the 25th anniversary of the Hunger Games, and for that reason they double the amount of kids that they throw into the Hunger Games arena, and it's pretty awful because it forces you to really like characters that you know cannot survive until the end, because, well, I didn't actually know who won this particular Hunger Games, but if you have read Hunger Games, you know who wins, and therefore it is, yeah, all the people that you're meeting, they're gonna die. So forming meaningful relationships, not a good idea, even though I did anyway. I did not listen to any of the warnings, because there were none, because I decided to read this before reading the Hunger Games, which, was it a good idea? If you can take the brutality, I think it's a pretty cool idea, especially because later on down the line, I imagine it would really pay off when you meet all these characters again, because I didn't know who were returning characters and who were new characters. So one day I do intend to read The Hunger Games, but this one made me realize that I don't think I was ready. However, because it was so good and has left such an impact on me, I decided to bring it onto this list and put it down as a certified banger, because if you're looking to read something that's kind of fast-paced and fun, this book is going to give you that. I say fun, it did absolutely destroy all of my hopes and dreams, and if it wanted to kill me on the inside, it managed to do that, but it was also an extremely gripping read. Now, I needed to have a bit of a respite from all of these books, because at that point, I think I was so spent and so burnt out during the time that I was reading, I knew that I needed to have a little bit of a break from these books, and so I decided to go out and pick up a short story collection, which I don't currently own either. The short story collections, there were two of them, and both of which are going to be appearing on this particular list because both of them meant a lot to me, and that is The Last Wish and The Sword of Destiny. These are the first two books in the Witcher franchise. I have already done an entire video where I talk about my feelings towards these books in depth and the overall franchise as a whole, but getting in there, I was so excited by these books because they were such a quick read and an excellent introduction to the Witcher franchise. If you are planning on reading the Witcher franchise, you kind of have to read these books. I don't know why, but it's not marketed like that in the UK, but reading these books is essential if you want to get the most out of the overall series. These are really good short stories, and they're put together in such an exciting way. Geralt as a character is very interesting. Seeing him come together with Ciri is also brilliant, and then you've got Yennefer and his relationship with Yennefer, which is built on potentially a lie, but potentially not a lie, and I will let you find out all about that by yourself. But definitely, if you want to pick up a short story collection, this is a really great collection to be able to get you started. I think it's really accessible, especially because the world itself is kind of a twisted version of fairy tales, and I thought that was a really interesting concept, which unfortunately ran dry later on in the series. But for these particular short stories, it kept up with that theme, which for me made this really interesting, because I was constantly trying to look at what the author was trying to do with the different stories that I already knew. Particularly, I believe there was a sort of a twist on Beauty and the Beast style thing. I found that one really interesting. So if you want an interesting story collection, then definitely go for these. I'm going to rate them very differently. I would say that with the Last Wish, I did have a good time reading that, and it's going to go in the had a good time category. However, I believe Sword of Destiny actually upped its game quite a lot, and the overall conclusion of Sword of Destiny is something that still sits with me to this day. I was very happy with the way that it came together, and so Sword of Destiny is going to go into the certified banger category. Now, if you want to get on Fantasy BookTube in any way, there is no way you are going to be able to resist seeing this next book and making a decision as to whether you are going to read it or not. And that is The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan, the first book in The Wheel of Time, which essentially is all about the rediscovery of the Dragon Reborn and seeing him go against the Dark Lord. The wheel continues to turn. The same things keep happening again and again over time, and there is a prophecy that is unfolding. And Robert Jordan, when he created this book, kind of came out of reading Lord of the Rings and was like, well, what if the Chosen One just was not ready? And that is kind of what this book does. This is an interesting book because I'm going to do a video all about the Wheel of Time, so I'm not going to go into this too much, but it is very much a book that you need to go into with the mindset that you are getting into a book series that is 14 books long, and I believe there's also a prequel novella that goes along with that. Now, if you want to get into that, you need to be knowing what you are getting yourself in for, because this book in itself reads extremely well as a single book on its own. I believe, I'll be honest with you, I think you can actually read this book and then put it down and then never come back to the Wheel of Time franchise ever again. I believe after you read book 2 onwards, you're probably going to want to keep coming back. But for this one in particular, it does a really good job of going on a journey. We just go on a journey. It's a load of cool characters that go on a really cool journey, exploring a really cool world, and genuinely comes to a conclusion at the end because you got a big bad. They take on said big bad, and you see the conclusion of what happens with said big bad. So The Eye of the World is one that I really enjoyed, and I know that it's a real classic within the genre. I know that it is sort of a reaction to Lord of the Rings, and then kind of became its very own thing, and that is why I had to put this one on. I've read this one twice now. The first time was when I was initially trying to get into fantasy, and the second time I was a little bit more confident, and I have actually gone out and bought all 14 books, because I do know that I want to read all of this book series. One of the complaints that I see from this book is that it is slightly derivative. Is that sounding a little bit like Of Blood and Fire? That is also called slightly derivative. Maybe not. I don't know. Yeah, there's definitely influence, huge influence from Lord of the Rings, and I'm sure there are other things that influenced Robert Jordan on this one. But if you like that kind of thing, then pick up this book and read it. Actually, funnily enough, I did read this book at the same time as reading Of Blood and Fire, so I was starting to see the similarities and how the two differentiate. But they do differentiate. They are two separate stories that might remind you of parts of the other one. I really enjoyed reading this particular one, which is why I'm going to put it in the certified banger category. It didn't blow my mind, but it certainly gave me clues that something more special was going to come along if I decided to put my time into that, and I will eventually release a video where I talk about whether you should read The Wheel of Time. It is coming up. I'm going to read book 4, which is the one where everyone says that they kind of fall in love with it, and once I've read book 4, I'm going to give you kind of my unfiltered opinions on whether the book series is for you. But that's coming out. It's in the future. It's not now. The next one that I'm going to talk about is actually one that has been something that I was avoiding for so many years, I was a huge fan of the television series and enamored by its world, and I've got to say that when I finally decided to pick up a Game of Thrones, it was genuinely one of the best decisions that I made last year. I loved this book series. It was kind of helped by the fact that I really wanted to buy all of the books, and I accidentally walked into a charity shop which had every single one of them apart from Game of Thrones, and so I went and bought this one off Amazon and then had the whole collection for literally under £10, which was the coolest bargain ever. This book is so good. George R.R. Martin just knows how to write. He is such a good writer. I've said it in other videos, but I will say it in this one. He is so good at writing world. He literally ties everything together. World, character, plot, everything just gets tied together with a beautiful bow. This particular one, if you don't know what Song of Ice and Fire is about, it's basically about a group of houses who are competing to figure out who is going to end up on the Iron Throne, and they're squabbling so much that they don't realize that there's actually a looming threat on the horizon that they should probably do something about. Stop arguing amongst each other and maybe, look at the thing that's going to be a real problem if they don't do something about it. And obviously whether they do something about it or not, you will find out. But this book doesn't really follow all of that. It kind of gives you all of the hints, while mainly this one is about the Starks and the Lannisters, and the rift that is happening within this particular book. There are all sorts of different mysteries, all sorts of interesting characters, all sorts of things that happen throughout. There's a lot of things to be said about Game of Thrones. In fact, I could make an entire video about Game of Thrones if you ever want me to do that. But this particular book, when I actually picked it up, I knew it was going to be good because I'd seen the series. But the way that this book reads is so good and so Moorish, and definitely accessible for anyone who just wants to get into this genre, especially if you wanted to, give yourself a little boost. You're like, oh, I'm feeling a little bit intimidated. You could always watch the TV series first and then read it. I don't really think it matters how you do it, but either way, this is an absolutely brilliant book to get you started, because George R.R. Martin knows exactly what he is talking about when it comes to being an author. Obviously, he hasn't finished the books yet. A lot of people get upset about that, but actually I think that the experience that I have had reading this book, and I've also done Clash of Kings as well, it's so good that I don't mind. I actually don't mind. I'm just going to be patient and hope for the best. Hope that it'll come out. This is an entire different debate, which I'm not going to get into right now. But yeah, Game of Thrones was so good that it is going to have to be an all-time favorite of mine. I think I've read this book 3 times now, and I would highly recommend that you should give it a go because it's really fun. The next book came to me when I was in the middle of a little bit of a reading slump, and I had heard lots of people talk about this book. I knew it was an indie book, so that was quite interesting to me because I want an indie publish my own book, so that would be really interesting to have a look at. I also knew the pacing was a little bit off, which was, again, just very interesting. I wanted to know what that meant. Why was the pacing off, yet you could love the book so much? And so, of course, naturally, I decided, because I've read so many series now that are making me feel guilty for not having finished them, I would like something that was a bit more standalone, and The Sword of Kaigan was just kind of calling to me. Gotta say that when I picked it up, I was a little unsure. I'd been reading a lot of kind of classic medieval style fantasy, so to be moving away from that, I was a little bit nervous, but I gotta say this did not disappoint in any way, shape, or form. This book was a wild ride. Like, it was absolutely mad. It is a book that when I finished reading it, I literally turned to my wife, who does not care about reading fantasy, and had to give her a big rant about how I felt about what I had just read. Otherwise, it would have just been on my mind forever, and this book sits rent-free within my mind. It follows Misaki, who is a mother who used to be an absolute badass, but who has kind of had to stop being said badass in order to become a mother. She is married traditionally, they have married her off into another family. She's married a person that she doesn't necessarily love. She's in a totally loveless marriage. Sometimes she even finds it difficult to really care about her children, but she knows that she has got a duty. And when we meet her, she is suppressing the urge to basically lash out at the world, which seems to treat her so horribly unfairly. We also follow Mamoru, who is her oldest son, who is basically trying to learn about all the things that he needs to do in order to be the man that his father is. There is something in this book that made me cry because it made me feel so seen in a world where what is done in this book is very rarely touched upon in the way that it is touched upon. When people talk about things of a political nature, when you read a book that talks about things of a political nature, it can be quite challenging because sometimes you feel like that book is trying to skew you one or way or another towards the argument, whereas M.L. Wang in this book does an absolutely brilliant job of allowing every single person to have their side of the argument and every single person to be seen. I thought this was such a brilliant book. I know why it won the prize that it did, because it is so good, and to be independently published, absolutely fantastic. And actually, do you know what? Because of its strange pacing, I'm not necessarily sure that a publisher would want to take such a punt on this book. And I think that, more fool them, because this is an absolutely fantastic book, and it has to go in the altered my brain chemistry category because it genuinely rocked my world and actually sits with me today as a story that I will pull out every now and again when I'm talking to people about representation of certain areas, which I won't go into because of spoilers. But basically, I know that it's going to be a change my brain chemistry book. If it's one that I bring out in conversations that are just general, where people don't even care about fantasy books, but I know that I can bring it in and I can use it as an amazing analogy. And it isn't just an analogy; it feels like a real world. It reads very well. But yeah, now the final book on my list is one where I was lucky enough to be able to have a chat with the author before I read the book, and we had a little bit of an interview. I'm actually going to be releasing a video which is all about this particular book in general. However, I had to put it on this list because I haven't read anything quite like Malazan, and when the guy pitched it to me, he said it's a little bit like Malazan with Joe Abercrombie's characters, and it was a style of storytelling that is a little bit like the game Elden Ring, and I was really in my Elden Ring era last year, so I thought, you know what, I'll give it a go, I'll give it a try. Chance did actually get in contact with me when I was doing this particular channel and sort of said, can you read this what I've written? And he gave me a free ARC copy, but I never got around to reading it, so I went out and I bought a physical copy, and I sat down, and this is a book that I have currently been reading the second book of, because I am lucky enough to be a beta reader on that book, and I'm not going to talk about that book at all, but I will say that a lot of things that I didn't like about this book are 100% fixed in the second one. This book does not hold your hand. This book does not sugarcoat. It gets to the point, it throws you in a world, and it makes you piece things together in a way that you have no choice but to sort of assume that you will eventually know what is going on. And it's not even that you don't know what's going on. There's enough familiar plot points within here for you to be able to follow the story wholeheartedly. But I gotta say, having read all of this book, when I initially came out of it, I thought it was a really good book. And I thought it was really well written. The world is extremely gorgeous. Oh, it's written so well. I love the world. The artwork within this book is absolutely beautiful. The book itself is amazing. The characters are so fantastic, and you find yourself being drawn to so many different ones. They're all so morally grey, and I really love what that does. And most of all, the message of this book is the message that I live by. I sent a message to the author the other day because I had a really bad night of anxiety. I had a really bad anxiety attack a few days ago, and the message of this book is that through pain comes growth, pretty much. Through pain and suffering comes growth. And I reread a poem that is at the end of this book, and it made me cry. It made me cry in that time, because even though I was feeling a lot of turmoil, this book made me remember that actually, that time, it's all about growth, and it's what it makes you, and it is how you come out. If you allow that to let you grow, then you'll become stronger, which is the main message of the book, which is why this book means so much to me and why I'm putting it in the altered my brain chemistry category. Because if a book can do that, if a book can pull you out of a situation like that, then I think that is a very powerful book. This is one to watch. and I'm not going to say any more about that because I say that all in the next video. But unfortunately, that video is not out, so I can't point you to that. But if you are curious about what it is that I thought about the Witcher franchise when I read all of them back to back, then that's cool because I got this vlog right here that you can be checking out. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know in the comments, what is your favorite books? What are the books that got you into fantasy? Is there anything that I missed on this list that you wish was there, or anything that you want to recommend to me? Let's get that conversation going. Thank you so much for watching this one. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.